Well, the future is electric. Like I need to tell anybody in this room that based on the presentations. So who here remembers the 1967 movie The Graduate, starring Dustin Hoffman? Who here was alive in 1967? I did see a few hands go up, though. That's great. Okay, there's a famous line that comes out of that movie. And it's Dustin Hoffman, who's a young man. He's not like he looks right now. He's a young man, still a good-looking guy. And he's dating this young woman, and they're at some event, and the father of the young man comes up to Dustin Hoffman. He pulls him away, have a little private conversation. He says, one word. Anybody know that? Plastics. It's the future. The future is plastics. Well, for me now, the future is electric. And I think you're seeing that all over the place. It could be the new one word. We even had a one word thing going on here a little bit ago, and that was great. So what does that mean for us in electric? Well, in California last year, 25% of new car sales were all electric. And that's 3 times the national average. California should be very proud of that accomplishment, and the rest of the country can catch up now. A little mention of Norway here and there, too. In Norway, 90% of new car sales were all electric last year. And speaking of Norway, Norway has a lot of ferries. It has about 180 ferries that crisscross the fjords and other waterways. Of that 180, 80 of those now are all electric, 80. By 2030, they plan on having 2/3, which I believe comes out to 120 of those to be all electric. Their first car ferry reduces carbon emissions by 95%, and it reduces operating costs by 80%. So there's lots of reasons to go all electric. My name is Dan Hodapp. I'm with the Port of San Francisco, and I'm going to talk to you about electric, And first of all, I'm going to give you an introduction to the Port of San Francisco, and then we're going to talk about our power needs. And we're going to go into a project, a phase 1 project, talk about some of our partners with that, our San Francisco Bay Ferry, also known as WEDA, or Water Emergency Transportation Authority, and how we're going about those projects and how we're cobbling together some funds to make it happen, and some of the lessons we've learned along the way in that project. And there's a lot of electric in that image, as you can see, all those lights. Okay, so who is the port? We're a trustee for state public lands. It was the state's lands until '69. They handed it over to the city and said, hey, you need to operate it under our rules, but you can have the property and all your associated debt that came with it. We're a self-supporting enterprise agency, which means we live and die by our own nickel. We have to raise the funds. We don't get any taxability. We can't tax, and we pay for services like fire, police, and whatnot. And then the state gave us a 3-part mission. It says we need to promote maritime commerce, navigation, and fisheries. We need to protect cultural resources, and natural resources, and we add in cultural resources. We have 2 National Register Historic Districts on the San Francisco waterfront. And we need to provide facilities that attract people to the waterfront. And that's a very broad definition, that last one. It includes our entire public space system, which we've largely developed in the last 20 years. And it also includes some retail opportunities. And you're probably familiar with Pier 39 or the ground level of the ferry building. So those are in there too. So if you take a look at those 3 bullets down at the bottom, what there makes money? Well, the Port of San Francisco, it's a 7.5-mile piece along the waterfront. And it is not a typical port. Typical ports have lots of container ships. Well, our container ships all went to Oakland because that's where 3 railheads are. And we do some break bulk, but really we're a diverse port. Probably 13 or 14 different maritime business lines. About 4 of those operate in the black. The rest of them are our obligation to provide those type of services. Protecting natural and cultural resources, well, that doesn't really make a lot of money. Providing facilities that attract people to the waterfront, that also is a big expense on us, although we do have 55 restaurants and about 550 leases. So we are a property manager, is really what we are, a maritime property manager. We rent office space, we park cars, and we also, where we can, make money off the maritime businesses. And that's what we're supposed to do, that's what we do. And it's very interesting because we operate more, we're a government agency that operates a bit like a business. We also get regulated from every which direction, whether it's city, state, neighborhood groups, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. So it has a lot of influence. People care about us, is how I like to think about it, and they become very involved, and that's great. Our diverse maritime portfolio, everything from cargo shipping to the foreign trade zone, ferries, tugboats, bar pilots, recreational marinas, and it's a very interesting mix that we have along the waterfront. And people enjoy seeing that too. It's what makes it an attraction, so we do things to show it off. I want to cover some projects that we've completed recently, and this is the downtown ferry terminal expansion, 3 new floats that provide for 3 new floats, so 6 boats come in, and this was largely brought to us by San Francisco Bay Ferry, who put together the funding for it and managed the project on it. And we'll talk about the electrification of that. We have the first floating fire station, we believe, in the world, recently put in. Okay, so everything we do now has to accommodate rising sea level, and that's an infrastructure challenge in itself. And we're planning through state guidance and working with the Army Corps of Engineers to accommodate 3.5 feet of sea level rise towards the later part of this century. They're all estimates, and be able to accommodate up to 7 feet. So anything we put in the water now, we have to do it so it can handle the anticipated sea level rise for the design life of the facility. So on something like this, a 75-year design life, we have to estimate that. So instead of doing a high pile with something that sits way up in the air, we did a design where it floats up and down. It really handles, it's got 1 ramp, and we happen to have the company that built it sitting right at this table here too, Power Engineering. It's a fabulous facility, sleeps 35 upstairs with all the living quarters. It, and then has all the marine operations downstairs, everything from the jet boats to containment booms, and everything else the fire department does. It's very interesting, and accommodates 3 fireboats on it. A very successful project. And about 10 years ago, we opened up a new cruise terminal, which is busy. We do about 85 ships a year. It's also an event center. So this is one where, as long as we don't acknowledge the capital cost of putting in, of constructing it, it operates in the black. But that's port finance. I spent about 6 years working on that one. So I want to talk about a little bit of our infrastructure challenges before we get into electric, and probably the biggest challenge, or one of the 2 biggest challenges, is the seawall. Okay, we've got this 7.5 miles. This image is showing about 3 miles of that. The historic seawall took it 48 years to build, and it added about 500 acres to the city where downtown is now. So downtown sits on all this soft bay mud with historic ships underneath it. And that seawall is really a big pile of rocks. On this image, it's a historic drawing. The bay is on the left and the city would be on the right. So there's wharfs that are put slightly over the water, as you can see here, and there's a big pile of rocks. It doesn't have any cementitious material in it. So it's subject to shaking in an earthquake. So now we get into one of the infrastructure challenges, what happens when we get an earthquake. This is what the seawall can look like they put a bulkhead wall just at the edge of it to keep it in place, but that's the concrete you see isn't what's structurally there. And of course, with a 100-year-old facility, the port is 160 years old. So we've got a lot of old material. So what happens in an earthquake? Well, the city shakes and it moves bayward. It can move as much as 3 to 10 feet bayward. And then we've got all these buildings on pile-supported buildings that with the city moving that direction, it can break the piles. It's a life safety danger as the buildings collapse down. So we've got kind of an emergency there. So we need to repair the seawall, and there's been a big study going on for that. And then we need to do it in a manner that can accommodate sea level rise, getting back into that. Okay, let's start at 3.5, able to reach 7. And that's on every project we do now. The downtown ferry terminal is one of the ones we built up the new plaza and all the gates to that 3.5, able to accommodate higher elevation. And we've been doing that. I think that was the first one out of the gate that we have done that on. And of course, the floating fire station is another example. Doesn't matter what it is. We made the piles extra long. So now let's talk about electrification. Why more power? Any guesses? Why do we need more power? Okay, you can yell it out, you know. Ferries, someone said ferries. Well, that's pretty much the answer. It's vessels, all the different vessels that are going electric. Ferries, excursion vessels, tugboats, the cruise industry where they all plug into shoreside power and pull anywhere from 8 to 12 or 14 megawatts when they're plugged in. Huge amounts of power. So we set out to determine what that would take to do that. So we put together all these complicated charts, which you can't read, but that's okay. It's just to impress you and say, okay, we did our analysis. But what we did is we have two electrical providers at the Port of San Francisco. One is PG&E, which is a smaller section, a smaller group, and the other is the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, SFPUC. And working with the PUC, we're looking at how in the future we're going to be using their service for new power. So we looked at current loads of what we're doing. We looked at where our development, our revitalization of the waterfront would take place. We plugged in the numbers for office, commercial, the maritime uses and whatnot, and we then looked at all the vessels, and we came up with essentially a tripling of our power along the waterfront. And it's not from doing commercial buildings or any little bits of residential, which are so energy efficient now, they don't really make much difference. It's about electrifying vessels. And we're looking at really up to 100 megawatts of additional power along the waterfront. So the purpose of our effort is to get the power to serve this electrifying of the fleet. And the advantage is we're taking dirty diesel off the water and replacing it with clean energy, Hetchy power. And so the why is, of course, the vessels. And then we also identified what's most urgent. How do we set priorities? What's coming along first? So that was we did a whole nother level of analysis where we started mapping out the entire waterfront, where these major projects were going to be. And the first we'll get into is the downtown ferry terminal with San Francisco Bay Ferry, but also the other projects. And then we looked at what do we think we're going to need by about 2030? And this number is showing about 60 megawatts. These dates, though, we tried to plan for 15 years, and we tried to plan for 20 years and even further, and nobody can think beyond 15 as part of what we learned, even with all land use planning and that type. And then every year, the dates seem to fluctuate. But we know government projects, and we know projects in general, and dates do move around. So we hope we're doing as accurate as we can when we come with these and the loads we need. So we mapped that out, looked at that for the length of the waterfront, then we started focusing in on areas. This one shows the northern waterfront, and it identifies specific projects where we see, and some of them are imminent and they're really coming at us. I think those are the red dots. And then other ones, well, yeah, we think they're happening, but there's a couple issues with them. And other ones, yes, we see them on the horizon there. They're not quite as urgent. They didn't quite make that other list. So we're looking at prioritization of it, and we're working with our PUC to convince them that we do have a real need to do this. We do need a whole power system. And we put together other types of maps that appeal to the PUC, how they think, where our circuits are, where they are connecting to the power. In San Francisco, PG&E owns the grid and PUC owns the power. It's just this wonderful marriage that is a whole lecture on itself. So where do they connect? So this is PUC language in this drawing here, but analyzing how does all that combination come into play. And then we talked to San Francisco Bay Ferry. What are their priorities? And if you start in the upper left drawing, they're starting with small and working continually up to big. Small, next biggest, next longest, and then longest. So the first shot is to do the short hop ferries, such as Treasure Island or other ones along the San Francisco waterfront. Pretty much all ferries come to the downtown ferry terminal. It is the hub. It's the exciting place to be. it's the destination. But it brings people in from all over the Bay Area and from communities that are rich and disadvantaged and ones that have air quality problems. So the changes we make affect these other communities around the Bay Area as well. And then we started, and Rita with her engineer started looking at, okay, how do we supply power to this ferries? How much do we need? When does the demand occur? So they started graphing this out with or without adding battery, but just pulling it off the grid. How much can we get off the grid? And I think part of this entire exercise is our infrastructure systems are not set up for the way society is going to become electric. And we're trying to plan on that. We're trying to be early in line so we get a bunch of this power, but we have to build these systems, and the systems take time to build for this increase. This is a graph showing how do we meet this peak. When a ferry boat comes in, it wants to charge in about 10 minutes, 10, sometimes 15, because they want to do it in a turnaround. That's like a huge dump of power. If you're like me and you plug your electric car in at night and it takes 4 to 5 hours to charge, running off a 240 40 or 60 amp circuit. Imagine what it takes a ferry that's just pushing water through the bay and they want to charge it in 10 minutes. You know, like, stand back. It's huge. So the bottom block here is what they would continually pull off the grid. And in this particular drawing, it's pretty low. It's only showing 1.5 megawatts. And then when a boat comes in, they want to pull 6 megawatts off in this case, which is, I think, a starter rate. Other vessels are going to go higher. But they want to do it very quickly. So you can combine the two. How much can you pull off the grid at a particular time? How much do you supplement with batteries? So when San Francisco Bay Ferry rebuilds each of their float, they're going to have a large battery pack in each one that you combine with the grid. So it can provide that much power. Then the boat goes out and another one comes in 45 minutes later, and then they do it again, but the batteries are all charged up again by then. So it's a technology that gets through this phase of how much can we pull off the grid at one time. And so phase one is we're going to be pulling power from the orange box, which is a PG&E facility in the South of Market area in downtown San Francisco, bringing it to a port parcel that sits right underneath the Bay Bridge within Caltrans shadow, and then running lines to the downtown ferry terminal. And this is, and then also the renovation of the floats to include the batteries, and they're talking about I think around $40 million for the total project between the two sides. Part of it will be paid by the ferry provider, San Francisco Bay Ferry. Part of it would be by the Public Utilities Commission. Notice I didn't say the Port of San Francisco is paying anything. We are just bringing all these parties together. And we're also looking at what are the next needs to come online. So we're planning for some of the adjacent uses. Where do the conduits go? How big? So we're getting into in the weeds with it, and that's really very fun. Oh, I guess that's that one. Let me see. Okay. And then we have put project schedules together. How are we going to implement these and go forward on that? But then, very importantly, how do we make these viable? Okay, ideally, when you go to your utility commission with projects, you say, okay, we've got this new project on. We want you to bring power over here. And so we did that we presented this whole plan to our Public Utilities Commission, and they go, wow, that's a lot of infrastructure. We're into the hundreds of millions of dollars for what I just walked through here to do all this. And so our job is to make that more financially viable for them, to help them get over the hump a bit so that they can do a revenue bond that does the capital work, and then the revenue from the electric pays for the remainder of it. And so the components of that are working with partners and community involvement and doing some grants. So we're working with San Francisco Bay Ferry to do an EPA grant. It's called the Clean Ports one. We're also doing a number of other grant applications to bring in various parts of this to make it happen and close the gap. And I'm going to go through. And then some other features that make us more appealing in the granting world. The community involvement, serving these disadvantaged communities, cleaning the air in areas other than our home port, downtown San Francisco, but really we're doing a regional benefit. I think think that one was just early and often is how you do community involvement. I'm going to go a little quicker. And everybody's familiar with the offshore wind project. Well, the Port of San Francisco is too, and we're looking to be part of that, to manufacture some of the bases for that. There's 2 sites off the California coast, and this is the number of facilities they're planning on building that, and the number of jobs is at the bottom, 12,000 to 49,000 jobs. It's just monstrous, the amount of training. So we're looking to partner with organizations that do workforce training as we go forward on that. More community involvement, because we're looking at putting in heavy industrial in areas that may have it, but we're looking at the environmental impacts that come through that, involving people, including with utilities themselves. We're doing job creation program. We're running our own Rising Tides youth employment. The San Francisco Bay Ferry is working with the Waterfront Coalition, which partners with a group of others, and does marine skills training to start bringing up so that San Francisco Bay Ferry can have people that work on the boats and in their boat yards as well. There's going to be a real shortage of skilled personnel as we go forward. I'm just going to skim through that. And it's good to have friends. The Working Waterfront Coalition has partnered with all these industry groups that when we do go out for funding, we do try to close the gaps to make these projects happen. We have a large field to pull from that can be part of that application and part of influencing our regulators. And we do have some success. This is an image off of an op-ed by Dennis Herrera. He's the executive director of the PUC, San Francisco PUC. And it came out last Thursday. And if you dig down in this article, there is $97 million for the port to do infrastructure facilities at the Port of San Francisco to do this northern waterfront piece that you're seeing. Not necessarily a downtown ferry terminal, but that's got its own sources of fundings. So by putting together this level of planning and working with these partners, we are seeing success and we are making real progress. We're seeing altogether $150 million of investment that are doing this infrastructure. And if there's one word to take away from today, what is that? Plastics, she says. You're wrong. That's the old word. It's electric. Thank you very much.